You know, it happens to almost every single one of us, usually right in the middle of, like, the ordinary cycle of the week.
Oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly universal thing.
Right, like you're just moving through the motions of your morning. Maybe you're navigating the transit system of a really bustling city, just moving with the crowd.
Swiping an access card, walking down a perfectly familiar corridor.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just standing at your kitchen counter, completing a repetitive household task, like, I don't know, washing a plate. And then suddenly you blink.
And you've arrived.
Yes, you arrive at your destination, or you put the dry plate in the cupboard, and you realize you have an absolute void of memory regarding the journey. Like none.
You were physically there, but completely absent.
Completely. The physical body was entirely present, putting one foot in front of the other, regulating your breathing. But your essence, the core of your conscious awareness, was completely adrift.
It's such a strange phenomenon.
It really is. You were just lost in this endless tide of past regrets. Maybe replaying some awkward conversation from the distant past or projecting violently into this vast constellation of future anxieties. For that fragment of time, you were essentially a ghost haunting your own life.
That's a really haunting way to put it, but it's accurate. It is a profoundly universal human experience. And yet, when you stop to really examine the mechanics of it, it is one of the most viscerally exhausting states a living creature can endure.
Exhausting, even if you're just sitting there.
Yes, exactly. Because what you're describing is a state of severe internal dissonance. You are physically resting, or at least operating on minimal physical output, but your mind is battling absolute phantoms.
Right, it's just spinning.
It's swinging violently like an untethered pendulum. You feel this profound disconnect from reality. And what is most fascinating and frankly tragic about this state is the invisible weight it places on our biological systems.
It's actually draining you physically.
Completely. It drains your vitality before the day has even truly begun. You wake up, you go through your morning routine, but you feel exhausted because your nervous system has been running a marathon in a realm that does not physically exist.
Man, that makes so much sense. It is this bone-deep, heavy exhaustion that you just can't logically explain to yourself. Because physically, you haven't done anything strenuous.
Right, you're just sitting there.
You are literally just sitting on a train seat looking out a window. But inside, your heart rate is elevated, your cortisol is spiking, and you're fighting like a multitude of invisible wars.
Which is exactly why this topic is so critical.
Yes. And that brings us to the core mission of our exploration today. We're taking this massive collection of research, articles, and notes, and we are extracting the absolute gold.
Skipping the dense academic jargon entirely.
Exactly. We're getting straight to the insights that actually change how you operate on an ordinary morning. Today, we're looking at this incredible, sprawling collection of research on cognitive psychology and mindful architecture.
It's really groundbreaking stuff.
It really is. Our mission here is to unveil the hidden machinery of conscious presence. We want to understand, at a fundamental biological level, why our brains just voluntarily surrender our agency to this automatic pilot.
And, more importantly, how to get it back.
Right. How to reclaim the sovereignty of the current moment, not by escaping or fleeing to a mountaintop or just ignoring the shadows of our reality.
Because that never works anyway.
It really doesn't. We have to understand the mechanics of our own minds well enough to step fully into the present. We are mapping out the secret mechanisms of our own existence. Because once you see how the machinery is wired, you can finally learn how to operate it.
And the machinery of the human mind is arguably the most complex structure we know of, but it's a marvel that defaults to efficiency over happiness.
Efficiency over happiness. That's a rough trade-off.
It is. It requires intentional mastery to override its factory settings. To understand why we drift into that ghost-like state on the train, we first have to understand the sheer, relentless continuity of the mind's operation.
It just never stops, right?
Never. The human brain operates continuously, and it's incredibly metabolically demanding. Yet it has evolved to run its background processing on less energy than a solitary spark.
Wow.
It never powers down. And because it is perpetually active, it creates what we might call a blank absorbent memory. It's basically a sponge for environmental data.
So it's just constantly soaking things up.
Exactly. It absorbs whispers, undercurrents, and background noise even when the conscious, decision-making self is asleep, anesthetized, or completely checked out staring out a transit window.
So it is essentially like a surveillance camera that never stops recording the background noise of the universe.
Yeah.
even when the security guard in the booth has, like, fallen asleep.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. Consider the experience of resting on a sofa near a glowing, flickering screen.
Oh, like falling asleep with the TV on. Guilty.
Right, we all do it. You might fall into a slumber, your breathing slows, and you believe you are deeply resting. But even in that slumber, the auditory and visual processing centers of your brain are absorbing the chaotic narratives playing out on that screen.
Wait, really? It's still processing all of that?
Oh, absolutely. It takes in the rapid dialogue, the musical cues designed to induce tension, the sudden percussive noises, and because your logical filtering system is offline, it weaves those chaotic signals directly into the fabric of your own dormant anxieties.
Oh, wow. So I'm basically internalizing stress that isn't even mine.
You're internalizing narratives and threats that do not belong to you. Without intentional guidance, without a sovereign consciousness at the helm actively filtering the data, the mind simply acts as an erratic pendulum.
Just swinging back and forth.
Exactly. Left to its own evolutionary devices, it will swing endlessly between the shadows of what has passed and the illusions of what is to come.
Okay, wait. I need to push back on this a little bit, because it seems like a terrible evolutionary design.
It definitely feels like one.
Right. Like, if this background processing network is just swinging past the present moment, never actually stopping in the now, and it's constantly absorbing ambient stress from a flickering screen or an overheard conversation, why would our brains be wired this way?
That's the core paradox, isn't it?
It just seems like an evolutionary glitch that just makes us miserable.
It feels like a glitch in our modern environment, for sure. But in the distant past, it was a vital survival mechanism. You see, the brain's primary directive is not your emotional fulfillment.
No.
No, its primary directive is keeping you alive until tomorrow. And to do that, it constantly scans the environment for threats.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you are sitting perfectly still in the present moment, completely content, you are highly vulnerable to a predator sneaking up on you.
Oh, so contentment equals vulnerability.
Biologically speaking, yes. So the brain's default mode is to project backward to remember past dangers and project forward to anticipate future threats. The pendulum swing is a radar system.
A radar system. Okay, I get that.
Yeah,
But we aren't exactly running from predators in the brush anymore.
exactly the problem. In our current era, the threats are rarely physical predators. The threats are social anxieties, financial pressures, or abstract fears absorbed from glowing screens.
So the brain doesn't know the difference, does it?
Not at all. It still reacts with the exact same chemical intensity. When left unchecked by our conscious awareness, this pendulum swing becomes the birthplace of immense sorrow and relentless apprehension.
Man, that is heavy. We spend an overwhelming majority of our metabolic energy mourning a past we cannot alter or dreading a future that has not yet materialized.
Precisely. Meanwhile, we are entirely absent from the only reality that actually exists.
The present breath.
The immediate physical sensation of the present breath. It's the only place where we actually have agency.
Okay, let's really unpack this, because while the biology makes perfect sense, the reality of living with it sounds incredibly daunting.
It can be overwhelming, yes.
Like, if our mind is this open, porous vessel taking on water from every single storm it passes through, constantly absorbing the background noise, the anxieties of others, the terrifying narratives on a news feed, how do we ever find the strength to steer it?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, if this threat detection system runs automatically and never stops, aren't we just doomed to be overwhelmed by the endless tide of modern life?
That feeling of being overwhelmed is incredibly valid. It's a symptom almost everyone experiences. However, it stems from a fundamental neurological misunderstanding
A misunderstanding of what?
of the true magnitude of the events we face versus our brain's internal magnification of them. We believe the tide is going to drown us because we are looking at it through a primitive survival lens.
And that lens distorts the size of the waves.
Inherently, your brain wants the threat to look massive, so you will take immediate action to avoid it.
So wait, we are literally making the waves bigger in our own heads because our biology thinks panic is safer than calm?
That's exactly what's happening. In the grand tapestry of our existence, the actual objective events that occur in physical reality constitute a mere fragment of our experience. A tiny, almost imperceptible sliver.
So what's the rest of it?
The overwhelming majority of our reality is constructed entirely by how our neural pathways interpret, accept, or battle those physical events. We do not live in a shared, objective reality.
We live in a self-constructed one.
Yes, a highly curated psychological reality. If you continuously focus the lens of your attention on potential threats, your brain physically strengthens the neural pathways associated with fear.
You literally magnify the shadows.
Exactly. If you seek out the chaotic, if your pendulum is always swinging toward the tempest, your brain assumes you live in a war zone, and your world literally becomes a storm of cortisol and adrenaline.
Wow. That makes me think of an experience I had recently. You know when you feel like your brain is a hurricane?
Oh, constantly.
You have this vast constellation of worries keeping you awake. You feel like your life is completely unmanageable. And then I tried this exercise where you take a physical instrument like a pen and you just write down the storm.
And what happened?
The strangest thing happens. You write it down, you look at the paper, and those 1,000 unmanageable thoughts are just a mere handful of highly mundane sentences.
Just a trickle on the page.
Literally, it's
Yeah.
just, I need to reply to my manager about the schedule, I have a slight pain in my shoulder, and I need to clean the kitchen. That is the whole hurricane.
That exercise perfectly illustrates the illusion of the overwhelming tide. And there's a fascinating neurological mechanism behind why writing it down is so revelatory.
Really, what's going on under the hood?
When those thoughts are swirling in your mind, they are caught in a loop between the amygdala, which is the emotion and fear center, and the memory center.
Right, so they just echo.
They feel infinite because they are just echoing back and forth, setting off emotional alarms. But the physical act of anchoring those thoughts onto paper forces a biological shift.
How so? What is actually happening in the brain when the ink hits the page?
To write a sentence, you must engage the prefrontal cortex. That's the logical, organizing, executive center of the brain.
The rational part.
Yes. You have to take abstract emotional dread and translate it into vocabulary, grammar, and physical motor control. By doing this, you literally drain the metabolic energy away from the fear center.
And redirect it into the logic center.
Exactly. The endless tide of anxiety, when captured and constrained in the physical realm of a piece of paper, is stripped of its emotional magnification.
That is wild.
You look at the paper, and the prefrontal cortex assesses the data objectively. It sees the mere trickle of actual tasks and recognizes them as entirely manageable. The storm was just an illusion of magnification generated by a panicked amygdala.
You look at the paper and think, wait, is this it? Is this what has been spiking my heart rate for the past 3 nights?
It's a humbling realization.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for how we live? It leads me to a pretty profound speculation, actually.
I'd love to hear it.
What if the overwhelming majority of our suffering is primarily an act of internal storytelling, rather than a reflection of objective truth?
That is the essential, terrifying, and ultimately liberating speculation we must grapple with. If we accept that our experienced reality is largely a narrative constructed by our own biology, then to master this storytelling, we must understand the forces at play.
The fundamental forces battling within our own minds.
Precisely. If we look back through the passage of eras to ancient wisdom traditions and parallel them with modern cognitive behavioral science, we see a universal principle. There are 2 warring entities within us.
Like light and shadow?
You can conceptualize them metaphorically as the constructive force of light and the destructive force of shadow, or scientifically, as the pathways of rational growth versus the pathways of primitive fear.
It's that classic dual nature of humanity. We have the prefrontal capacity for immense creation, deep compassion, and logical planning, but we also have the primitive capacity for destruction, paralyzing fear, and cruelty.
And they coexist eternally. The great mistake many people make when trying to improve their lives is believing they must completely obliterate the shadow to be whole.
Like trying to surgically remove all fear and anxiety.
Exactly, which is impossible. Those structures are baked into your biology. But the entity that dictates your destiny, the force that shapes your constructed reality, is simply the one you choose to nourish with your focus.
It all comes down to the mechanism of selective perception.
Yes, selective perception.
I've heard the term, but let's break it down for everyone. Meaning, we literally only see what our brain is primed to see, and it deletes the rest of the data.
That's the gist of it. The human nervous system is bombarded by an incomprehensible amount of sensory data every single second.
If we processed it all, we'd go crazy.
Our brain would overload instantly. So a structure in the brainstem acts as a filter. It only lets through information that it believes is vital to your survival or highly relevant to your current goals.
So our attention possesses a literal gravitational pull.
That is a vital concept for our exploration today. Whatever we cast our gaze upon, whatever we tell our brain is important, multiplies in our reality. It pulls more the same toward it because the filter starts letting that specific data through.
Let me give a really mundane, relatable example of this because it proves the point perfectly. Let's say you decide you want to buy a very distinctively colored vehicle, maybe a bright yellow compact hatchback.
Okay, I can picture that.
Now, prior to this decision, you have never noticed this specific yellow car on the road in your entire life. As far as your brain was concerned, they didn't exist.
They were filtered out.
Exactly. But the moment you decide it's the car you want, suddenly you witness that exact yellow hatchback everywhere you look, every intersection, every parking lot, every highway.
It's almost uncanny when it happens.
Right. And it is not that the universe suddenly reorganized itself to manufacture more yellow hatchbacks and place them in your path. It is that your attention commanded your neurological filter to prioritize that reality.
Your brain said, this shape and color is now highly relevant data. Do not filter it out. Show it to me.
That is a flawless, grounded illustration of the mechanism. The vehicles are always there, passing you by every single day. Your awareness of them was absent because they held no relevance.
Your attention created an entirely new conscious reality out of the existing unchanged environment.
Okay, I love this, but I have to ask the obvious question.
Go for it.
If we know that attention creates reality, and we know that we can literally tune our neurological filter to see more of what we focus on, why on earth do we so often focus our gravity on the exact things that cause us pain?
That is the paradox of human nature.
Like, if I can choose to look for yellow cars, why do I choose to look at the shadow, knowing it will just bring more shadow? Why does my brain filter for the one insult hidden in a dozen compliments?
Because of unseen historical tethers. We are held fast by deeply ingrained conditioning.
Invisible chains, basically.
Invisible neural chains forged in the distant past that hold us in place even when the cage doors of our current reality are wide open. To understand why we involuntarily choose the shadow, why we filter for pain and threat, we have to explore a well-documented psychological phenomenon.
Learned helplessness.
Yes, learned helplessness.
This is one of those psychological concepts that once you learn the mechanism behind it, you start seeing it absolutely everywhere, in your own life and everyone around you. Can you explain how this develops?
The mechanism is best understood by looking at early conditioning. Consider a massive, incredibly powerful creature in the animal kingdom, a beast of immense size and staggering muscular power.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Yet this titan can be held captive by a tiny, fragile wooden stake driven just a few inches into the dirt. A stake it could effortlessly rip from the earth with a mere fragment of its current strength.
How is that physical impossibility maintained?
It happens because the titan was tethered to that exact same stake during the dawn of its cycle, when it was small, fragile, and genuinely lacking the strength to pull it free.
When it was young, it pulled and pulled, it exhausted itself, it experienced the pain of the collar, and the stake held firm.
It learned a very specific, painful lesson. The tether is stronger than my will to escape.
It learns despair.
Precisely. The brain creates a strong neural pathway that associates pulling against the tether with futile pain. And even as the creature grows over the passage of eras into a magnitude of power absolutely capable of shattering its constraints.
The memory of the tether holds it paralyzed.
The established neural pathway holds it paralyzed. It simply no longer tests the boundaries. The physical chain is entirely irrelevant. The psychological chain is unbreakable.
The phantom tether. But let's bring this out of the animal kingdom and into human psychology, because we aren't tied to physical stakes. How does this learned helplessness manifest in a person walking down a hallway or sitting in an office?
It manifests as a profound, invisible barrier to action. As human beings, we all experience early pains, early failures, rejections, or environments where our efforts yielded no results.
Like trying to express a boundary as a kid and being punished for it.
Exactly. Or perhaps you struggled with a subject in school and were mocked. When we fail repeatedly in the distant past, or when our environment is unresponsive to our needs, our developing brains learn that effort is futile.
It's safer not to try.
The brain, seeking to protect us from the continuous emotional pain of repeated failure, essentially wires a circuit breaker that cuts off our ambition before we can even try.
We just resign ourselves to a narrative of fundamental incapability. We say, I am just not good at relationships, or I could never speak in public, or I will always be terrible with finances.
And we believe it as an absolute truth.
We really do. And the really twisted part about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is actually a dark biological comfort in this resignation.
A massive comfort.
Because we subconsciously embrace the role of the helpless victim. because it requires zero expenditure of metabolic energy. Growth, challenging our limits, testing the boundaries to see if the stake will move today. These actions require immense psychological energy.
And they carry the terrifying risk of fresh failure.
Right. Victimhood is a highly efficient energy-saving mode, even though it completely suffocates our potential.
You have articulated the biological payoff perfectly. It is significantly easier for the brain to sit by the stake and justify its paralysis by saying, "The world is rigged, I cannot move," than to risk pulling against it and dealing with the uncertainty of a new outcome.
The tragedy is that the environment has changed. You are no longer that fragile child. You possess adult agency, resources, and intellect. You aren't trapped anymore.
But the brain hasn't updated the software.
It makes you wonder, as you look back over your own life, how many of our current absolute impossibilities are merely phantom tethers from an era we have long since outgrown.
An incalculable amount.
How many doors are sitting right in front of us completely unlocked, but we just refuse to even reach for the handle because we remember it being locked a decade ago?
The lion's share of our limitations are historical echoes, not current physical realities. And these tethers are reinforced daily, hourly, by the quiet, unnoticed operations of our mind.
They're maintained by that automatic pilot we discussed earlier.
Yes, and its reliance on a vast constellation of cognitive traps. We must understand that the automatic pilot is not inherently malicious. It is, as we noted, a marvel of evolutionary efficiency.
It relies on heuristics, right? Mental shortcuts.
Exactly. Mental shortcuts that allow us to process immense amounts of data quickly. It is what allows us to walk down a flight of stairs without consciously calculating the exact angle of our knee and the required muscle tension for every single step.
Right. If I had to consciously engage my prefrontal cortex to think about every single muscle contraction required to open a door or chew a piece of food, my brain would overheat in a brief moment.
The autopilot is an absolute biological necessity for physical navigation.
But, and this is where the system breaks down, when that same crude, rapid processing automatic pilot is applied to our highly complex, nuanced, emotional, and social landscape, the results are disastrous.
Because social dynamics aren't stairs.
Exactly. It relies on a constellation of faulty mental traps, which are essentially reality distortions designed to jump to the fastest rather than the most accurate conclusion.
These traps are what keep us tethered to the stake.
Okay, let's break the theoretical mold here and jump into the practical application. Let's dissect some of these universal distortions. I want to use a highly relatable everyday scenario to run these traps through, let's say. A professional gets passed over for a promotion they really wanted.
Okay, a very common, painful scenario.
They worked hard, they felt ready, but the role went to someone else. The automatic pilot takes over. What is the first trap they fall into? Let's talk about extreme polarity.
Extreme polarity is the brain's attempt to categorize complex situations into binary, low-resolution data to save processing power.
So, black and white thinking.
Exactly. It is the belief that if something is not absolutely flawlessly successful, it is an utter catastrophic failure. There is no middle ground, no spectrum of success, no nuance. It is a binary world of absolute perfection or absolute disaster.
So, in our promotion scenario, the professional doesn't say, well, I didn't get this specific role, but I gained great experience during the project and my manager noted my strong leadership skills.
That would require nuanced processing.
Right. Instead, under the trap of extreme polarity, they immediately declare, I am a complete failure. My entire career is a joke. All that hard work was utterly worthless. The single missing piece negates the entire structure of their professional worth.
Exactly. It wipes out all the positive data points because a binary system only has two settings, 1 or 0, win or lose, a painful and incredibly common reality.
And what's the next trap?
The second major trap in this constellation is the endless echo. This heuristic involves taking a singular, localized negative event and projecting it forward as an eternal, unbreakable curse across the passage of eras.
So the professional doesn't just think they failed today. The endless echo tells them, I didn't get this promotion, therefore I will never get promoted. I will be stuck in this exact cubicle until the end of time. No one will ever recognize my talent.
It takes a momentary rejection and stretches it into an infinite horizon of suffering.
It creates a false prophecy of permanent doom.
Yes. You experience a single rejection, and the endless echo convinces your nervous system that rejection is your permanent identity. Closely related to this, and perhaps the most insidious, is the shadow filter.
Oh, this is the one that ruins perfectly good days.
It really is.
It's like standing in a vast, Sunlit meadow, surrounded by vibrant colors, incredible life, breathtaking beauty, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin, but actively choosing to kneel down, put a magnifying glass over a single patch of dried, cracked mud, and convincing yourself the entire world is a barren, lifeless wasteland.
That is the shadow filter perfectly articulated. The biological mechanism here is the amygdala overriding the visual and cognitive fields to fixate on the one perceived threat.
So it literally deletes the good stuff.
Functionally, yes. In our scenario, the professional might have a career filled with remarkable accomplishments, a warm network of supportive colleagues, and a stable income. But the automatic pilot focuses entirely on the solitary dark speck, the name of the other person on the promotion announcement, and completely filters out the vast light of their actual lived reality.
The brain simply deletes the positive context. It's wild. What's the last one?
Finally, we have the cognitive distortion known as the oracle's hubris.
This is a massive one. It is the absolute unfounded arrogance of assuming we possess the supernatural ability to read the silent, unexpressed judgments in the minds of other people.
We love to play mind reader.
We do.
Yeah.
The professional sits in the meeting after the announcement and thinks, I know exactly what everyone is thinking about me. They are all looking at me with pity. They think I'm a loser. My boss thinks I'm incompetent.
We act as if we have a direct neural link to their thoughts.
And shocker, those thoughts are always highly critical of us.
Always. Mind reading and its counterpart, fortune telling. Predicting the absolute certainty of future catastrophe without a shred of empirical evidence.
The oracle's hubris convinces us that the script of our life is already written, and it ends in tragedy. So the brain concludes, why bother expending energy trying to alter it?
It is the ultimate rationalization for returning to the safety of the tether.
We act as if we have a crystal ball, but it has a massive glitch where it only ever shows us the absolute worst-case scenario.
Exactly. Now, recognizing these traps is obviously the first step. Naming the demon takes away some of its power.
But just knowing I have a shadow filter engaged doesn't automatically turn it off, right? My heart is still racing, I'm still sweating, I still feel terrible about the promotion.
Actively changing the biological lens through which we view the world has to be the next step.
How do we dismantle this unified, monolithic panic when the autopilot has a death grip on the steering wheel?
When you realize you are trapped in the gravity of these cognitive distortions, you must consciously, deliberately force the prefrontal cortex to intervene. You must force the mind to cycle through a spectrum of diverse perspectives.
You can't just let it run automatically.
No, you cannot evaluate reality automatically. You must evaluate it strategically. We can think of this method as manually rotating a series of lenses over your mind's eye to break the heuristic shortcuts.
Okay, walk me through this manual override. If I am caught in the distortion of extreme polarity over this lost promotion, my emotional alarms are blaring. What is the very first lens I should pick up? Because if you tell me to just look on the bright side, I'm going to throw my microphone across the room.
And you would be completely justified in doing so because toxic positivity is an invalidation of your biological reality. The first lens is absolutely not optimism.
Thank goodness. So what is it?
The first lens is raw, unedited emotional resonance. You do not suppress the feeling. You give it a localized, sovereign space to exist. You put on the lens and state clearly, I am profoundly frustrated, I feel deep disappointment, I am angry, and I feel embarrassed.
Okay, I actually really appreciate that. You acknowledge the chemical reality of your body. You let the emotion exist without trying to shove it into a box.
Yes, and I assume this is the key. You don't let the emotion dictate the objective facts.
Ah, okay.
Exactly. You honor the feeling, which ironically begins to calm the amygdala because it no longer has to scream to get your attention.
It feels heard.
Precisely. Once the emotional alarm is acknowledged, you immediately rotate to the second lens, the lens of objective, unvarnished truth. Just the empirical facts, entirely stripped of interpretation, narrative, or emotional weight.
Like a cold, hard ledger in a laboratory. So for the promotion, the objective lens notes. There was one position, 2 people applied, the other person possessed a specific certification I do not yet hold. They received the title.
Just the data points.
It does not say, the universe is punishing me or my boss hates me. It just says, here are the localized data points.
Precisely. If a heavy storm arrives right before a long-planned journey, the objective lens notes only the barometric pressure, the precipitation rate, and the structural reality of the wet road. It separates the fact of the falling water from the emotional frustration of the delay.
They are two entirely different phenomena.
Yes. Only after grounding yourself in objective reality do you actively rotate to the third lens, the lens of radiant optimism and hidden benefits.
Now we look for the silver lining, but it has to be grounded in the facts we just established.
It is more strategic than a simple silver lining. It is an active neurological search for utility. With the loss promotion, this lens forces the brain to seek constructive patterns. This frees me from the massive overtime that role required, allowing me to focus on a different skill set. Or perhaps this delay prevents me from taking a role under a manager who is secretly incredibly difficult to work for.
It shifts the perspective from loss to protection.
Exactly. With the storm, this lens acknowledges that the Earth is receiving vital nourishment, or the delay prevents a mechanical failure on the road. But to ensure this doesn't devolve into delusion, we immediately balance it by applying the fourth lens, the lens of vital caution and potential peril.
So we don't just become blindly optimistic, ignore reality, and drive our car directly into a flooded river.
Exactly. This lens acknowledges the slippery path, the reduced visibility, the genuine risks of the environment.
In our career scenario, the caution lens notes, I need to formally ask for feedback so I don't repeat the same blind spots in the next interview.
It is not fear, it is strategic caution. Once the risks are mapped, the paralysis of the emotional brain is usually broken. We can then rotate to the fifth lens, the lens of infinite creative alternatives.
The brainstorming phase. If the main highway is flooded, what are the back roads? Could we take a train? Could the journey happen virtually?
Yes, looking for the alternate routes.
In the career scenario, if I can't move up in this department, could I laterally transfer? Could I take a night class to get that certification? Should I update my resume and test the open market?
Yes, this lens shatters the all-or-nothing extreme polarity. It reestablishes your agency by proving that the board has many moves left.
The board is still open.
And finally, after forcing your brain to look through all these diverse, contradictory perspectives, you synthesize the data by putting on the final lens, the lens of the sovereign orchestrator.
The ultimate decision maker. CEO of the mind.
The sovereign orchestrator looks at the objective ledger of facts, honors the valid emotional resonance, weighs the hidden utility against the strategic cautions, reviews the creative alternative routes, and then, with clear-eyed agency, decides which single physical action to take next.
By dismantling our monolithic, unified panic into these distinct, manageable perspectives, we completely strip the chaos of its power over us.
We strip its power away.
We take a hurricane and break it down into a sequence of logical evaluations. But let's be real with the listener for a moment. Consistently applying these lenses, catching yourself in a distortion while your heart is racing, pausing your reaction, and manually forcing your brain to rotate through 6 different cognitive viewpoints. That requires an immense draining force.
It does. It requires willpower.
And this brings us to a critical, culturally pervasive misunderstanding about the actual nature of willpower. People tend to treat willpower as if it is an endless, mystical reservoir of moral character. You either inherently possess it and you're a good person, or you lack it and you are weak.
That is biologically false. Willpower operates precisely like a physical metabolic muscle.
Like a bicep or a hamstring. It requires glucose, it requires energy, and it gets tired.
Exactly. It possesses immense strength in short bursts, but it is highly subject to fatigue. This is known in cognitive psychology as ego depletion, though the exact terminology is less important than the mechanism.
Like lifting weights.
Yes. If you go to the gym and lift heavy weights all morning, your muscle will physically fail to lift even a light object in the afternoon. It is biologically depleted.
Willpower works the exact same way.
It does. It depletes with use, and it requires intentional physical replenishment.
This explains so much about human behavior. So if I spend all morning using my willpower to politely suppress my profound irritation at a difficult coworker,
Which takes a lot of energy.
a ton of energy, and then I use all my willpower all afternoon to force myself to focus on a tedious spreadsheet instead of looking at my phone, by the time evening rolls around, my willpower muscle is completely metabolically fatigued.
Utterly depleted.
Which is exactly why I end up abandoning my plans to exercise, ordering greasy takeout, and staring blankly at a screen for an endless stretch of time. It's not a moral failure, it's a fatigued muscle.
That is the precise mechanical reality of it. You burn through your cognitive resources regulating your environment. But there is a deeper layer to this metabolism. We exhaust our willpower significantly faster when we rely on external motivation rather than internal alignment.
What do you mean by that?
When you are using your will to seek external validation, to prove your worth to a skeptical world, or to constantly fight against conditions you fundamentally refuse to accept, the muscle burns out at a highly accelerated rate. The friction is immense.
Because the energy source is completely outside of our control. We're fighting gravity instead of using it.
Precisely. True, sustainable transformation stems from internal reference. It occurs when your ambition perfectly aligns with your innermost essence and core values, rather than external demands.
It's an alignment issue.
When you are acting in alignment with who you actually want to be, willpower operates more like a steady, self-renewing current than a strained, trembling muscle. You don't have to force yourself to do things that genuinely align with your nature.
That sounds incredibly peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in a modern reality that is absolutely desperate for instant metamorphosis.
We want everything yesterday.
Right. We have zero cultural patience for the slow building of a muscle or the steady flow of a current. We want the hack. We want the shortcut. We plant a seed in the ground at dawn, and we stand over the dirt, arms crossed, demanding the fruit for the sunset.
The illusion of haste.
And when the harvest does not immediately materialize by lunchtime, we abandon the field entirely. We declare the soil cursed. We say, well, I tried meditating for a brief moment, and I still feel stressed, so the whole concept is a lie.
The illusion of haste is one of our greatest adversaries in achieving conscious presence. We view change as a software update, something that should download and install rapidly.
But it's not.
True change is not a superficial adjustment to our comfort zones. True psychological change is akin to biological birth. It is a fundamental shift in environment, structure, and existence.
Give me an example of that.
Think of an amphibious creature transitioning from an aquatic, embryonic state to walking on land and breathing air. It is a massive shock to the biological system. It requires the patience of eras, the steady, rhythmic application of effort, and a tolerance for deep discomfort.
You simply cannot rush the fundamental architecture of transformation.
You cannot.
So, if willpower is a physical muscle that predictably fatigues, and true change requires the patience of eras rather than the speed of a download, how do we practically train this muscle? How do we anchor our awareness in reality so we don't just burn out by the afternoon and retreat to our comfortable, miserable shadow filters?
We must bypass the exhausted cognitive loops entirely. When the prefrontal cortex is too tired to rotate the lenses we discussed, we must return to the most fundamental, primitive elements of our existence.
Our physical senses.
Yes. We must anchor our awareness directly into our physical senses.
The alchemy of the senses. This circles us back to the core idea of conscious presence that we started with.
Yes, it does. A common trap in pursuing presence is the belief that you must forcefully empty your mind of all thoughts. But if you command your mind to be empty, it will instantly fill itself with the frantic effort of trying to be empty, or it will fixate on a pink elephant.
Right. The harder you try not to think, the more you think.
Exactly. True presence is rarely achieved by creating a vacuum. It is achieved by filling the mind entirely with the intense, immediate sensory data of the current physical moment.
You crowd out the anxiety by overflowing the sensory processors.
Precisely.
Give me a grounded example of how to practically apply this. Look, if you're listening to this on your commute, you're probably thinking, I don't have time to sit on a cushion for an extended period and contemplate the universe. I have a massive project due. How do we fill the mind with the present in the middle of chaos?
Let us explore the philosophy of conscious consumption, a foundational ritual of presence that requires no extra time.
Okay, I'm listening.
Consider the mundane act of eating a solitary item of food. Let's say a single cashew or a slice of fruit. Normally, under the automatic pilot, you would thoughtlessly cast it into the furnace of your body while your mind is swinging on the pendulum, reading an email, worrying about a meeting.
You extract the calories, but you completely miss the experience.
Conscious consumption requires you to apply the absolute totality of your sensory awareness to this solitary object for just a fleeting moment.
You actually stop and look at it.
You observe its unique geography. You notice the ridges, the variations in color, the specific way the ambient light reflects off its surface. You register its exact texture against the skin of your fingers.
You're really studying it.
You bring it near your face and inhale its essence. consciously allowing the complex aromatic notes to register fully in your olfactory system. You listen to the subtle acoustic crunch it makes as you bite into it.
Wow, engaging every sense.
And finally, as you consume it, you isolate and experience the complex symphony of its taste as if it is the very first time you have ever encountered this specific form of sustenance.
It sounds almost painfully slow and deliberate, but I can see the underlying mechanism of why this works. It completely shatters the automatic pilot.
It has to.
If your visual, tactile, olfactory, and gustatory processors are entirely consumed by the geography of a piece of fruit, your brain literally does not have the available cognitive bandwidth to simultaneously run the simulation of tomorrow's meeting or replay yesterday's argument.
The physical present takes up the entire screen of your consciousness.
The anxiety starves for lack of energy, and the implication is profound. If we can apply this intense magnitude of awareness to a simple piece of food, we could theoretically apply it to anything. To our daily labor, to a conversation with a friend, to washing the dishes, to feeling our own sorrow.
And most importantly, to our existence itself. It is the practice of inhabiting your own life while it is happening.
Okay, I love the fruit example for grounding myself. But I have to push back here on how this translates to social environments.
Social environments are much harder.
Right. It's one thing to sit alone in a quiet room and eat a cashew mindfully. You control the variables. It is entirely another thing to maintain conscious presence when you are dealing with chaotic, unpredictable, highly demanding human beings.
Exactly.
How do we maintain this sovereign awareness in the noise and friction of complex relationships?
That is the ultimate crucible of the practice. To navigate the chaos of human interaction without losing our sovereignty and reverting to our primitive defense mechanisms, we can rely on a sequence of internal anchoring that we might call the sequence of grace.
The sequence of grace.
This is the integration of a universal ritual designed to protect your nervous system and project a calming presence into chaotic environments.
Okay, constellations of guides, sequence of grace. These are beautiful poetic terms from our source material, but let's translate them into practical utility. If I'm about to walk into a contentious meeting, how does this sequence actually work?
The sequence operates in 3 distinct sequential movements of the mind. The first is offering a moment of silent gratitude to a constellation of guides from our past.
Okay, stop right there. If someone just cut me off in traffic or a colleague is actively undermining me, I am absolutely not thinking about a constellation of guides. I am thinking about how to defend myself. How do I actually use this?
A fair challenge. Let's translate this into the neurology of a high-stress moment. When you are threatened, your brain feels isolated and vulnerable.
True. You feel alone in the fight.
By consciously taking a mere moment to silently acknowledge someone from your past who demonstrated immense patience, or a mentor who taught you resilience, you are performing a psychological trick.
Oh, I see.
You are anchoring your current frantic nervous system to a memory of profound stability. You are reminding your brain that you possess the learned tools of calmness. You are bringing your best teachers into the room with you, neurologically speaking.
It shifts you out of the isolated fight-or-flight response and into a grounded, supported state. You aren't praying to them. You are activating the neural networks associated with their calm demeanor. You literally borrow their emotional regulation. That makes perfect sense. What is the second movement?
The second movement is granting ourselves a deliberate physical pause of transition between environments. This is a vital boundary that modern society has completely erased.
We just rush from one thing to the next?
Before entering the sanctuary of your home after a day of intense labor, or before stepping from a chaotic, loud environment into a peaceful one, you must take a sovereign pause. You must consciously shed the psychological armor of the previous environment.
You do not carry the adrenaline of the battlefield into the sanctuary of the living room.
Precisely.
This is huge. It's the literal doorway threshold habit. You sit in your vehicle for an extra deliberate pause. You take a breath. You consciously decide to leave the commute at the door. You leave the argument from the office outside.
You're setting a boundary for your nervous system.
You literally instruct your nervous system to transition its state from defense to connection. If we don't do this, we end up barking at our families because we are still reacting to an email from an hour ago. And the third movement.
The third movement is perhaps the most difficult for our primitive brains to execute, but it is unequivocally the most transformative for our social reality.
I'm intrigued. What is it?
Offering a fleeting heartbeat of pure, positive assumption to every stranger or difficult person we encounter.
Wow. Pure positive assumption. That goes against every survival instinct we have.
Exactly. When a stranger crosses your path or a colleague sends a terse message, your automatic pilot, your ancient survival mechanism, immediately searches the data for a threat or negatively judges their utility. It assumes malice.
It's just trying to protect us.
The sequence of grace demands that for a single heartbeat, you manually override that reflex and project a profound, silent goodwill toward them. You assume that their terse email is a result of them being overwhelmed, not a result of them hating you.
You assume their fundamental humanity, their hidden struggles, and their inherent worth.
Yes, you assume incompetence or stress rather than malice.
And the brilliant part about this is that it isn't just about being a nice person. It's a defensive strategy for your own nervous system. It changes your entire biological posture.
It keeps your amygdala from firing.
If I assume positive intent, my own amygdala doesn't fire. My body language relaxes, my vocal tone softens, my heart rate stays steady. It preemptively diffuses the conflict before it even begins because I am not projecting threat into the room.
That's the power of the sequence.
And this is a massive, but doing this consistently requires us to not be projecting our own historical unresolved traumas onto everyone we meet. Which brings us to the heaviest, but perhaps the absolute most essential structural component of this entire exploration.
The echoes of our dawn.
To achieve true, lasting sovereignty in the present moment, we cannot just use cognitive tricks. We must fundamentally reconcile with the echoes of our distant past.
Indeed. We cannot outthink our unhealed wounds. Our inner emotional landscape is not just populated by our current logical adult concerns.
There's a lot more going on in there.
It is deeply and often invisibly governed by the dominant emotional weather of our early guardians and the suppressed cries of our younger selves. We all carry a fragmented self.
The inner child. The version of us that absorbed the rules of survival long before we had the cognitive capacity or the prefrontal cortex development to question if those rules were actually true.
Precisely. A much younger iteration of you perhaps learned that expressing anger or setting a boundary was a punishable offense, resulting in a withdrawal of affection.
Or perhaps you learned that demanding attention resulted in abandonment.
And so, that fragment of your psychological architecture froze in time, rigidly holding on to that specific defensive posture to keep you safe. Whenever a modern situation vaguely resembles that early threat, the frozen fragment hijacks the system.
Like a ghost grabbing the steering wheel.
To be truly present, to stop reacting to the past, we must journey inward, meet this historical echo, and listen to its fears without the dismissive judgment of our adult intellect.
We must become the sovereign, capable protector that younger self never had.
We have to reparent ourselves.
We have to notice when we are reacting with a level of panic that doesn't match the current reality and recognize that it is the echo reacting. We have to tell that echo, I know you learned in the distant past that the world is incredibly dangerous and that you are powerless, but I am an adult now. I have resources. I am here, and I can protect us.
To illustrate the profound biological necessity of this process, consider the physical metamorphosis of the unborn.
The webbing metaphor.
Yes. When a physical hand is first forming in the earliest dawn of our biological development, it does not look like a hand. It begins as a solid, webbed mass of tissue.
Like a paddle.
For the fine dexterity of the individual fingers to form, for the hand to reach its true, articulate potential to grasp and create, certain cells between the fingers must undergo a process called apoptosis. Programmed willing cellular dissolution. The webbing must die away.
The tissue literally has to dissolve itself so the fingers can be free to move independently.
It is a programmed, necessary dissolution for the sake of higher function. In our psychological metamorphosis, we must undergo an identical process.
The psychological webbing.
Our old defense mechanisms, the tantrum, the immediate withdrawal, the people-pleasing, the extreme polarity, these were the webbing. They protected us when we were a fragile mass forming our identity.
But now, they restrict us.
We must willingly dissolve our attachment to these obsolete fears, this inherited shame, and the phantom tethers of our youth. We must let those old defensive structures dissolve to allow our true potential, our true psychological dexterity in the world to clearly articulate itself.
That is a staggering, beautiful biological image. Letting the protective webbing dissolve so we can finally have the dexterity to firmly grasp the reality of our own lives.
It's a painful but necessary dissolution.
And it brings me to a realization about the entire architecture of conscious presence we've discussed today. Freedom. True. Lasting freedom is absolutely not the absence of boundaries or the avoidance of difficulty.
No, it's not.
And living in the moment is absolutely not a philosophical excuse for reckless irresponsibility, hedonism, or ignoring the consequences of our actions. It is actually the ultimate, heaviest form of responsibility.
It requires immense courage.
It is the profound courage to stand completely exposed in the present physical moment, feeling the wind and the rain of reality, honoring the heavy history of your past, but utterly refusing to allow it to dictate the trajectory of your future actions.
If we pull all of these threads together and connect this to the broader picture of human existence, the ultimate trajectory of our potential is not to banish the shadows.
We aren't trying to just be happy all the time.
It is not to construct an artificial, sanitized reality or force an unnatural, toxic state of perpetual joy where we pretend the heavy storms do not exist. Pain is a biological reality. Suffering is a narrative choice.
Right. No forced, manic smiles while the ship is taking on water. We acknowledge the water.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of conscious presence is to become a vast, unshakable observer of your own internal ecosystem. To cultivate a sovereign consciousness that is as expansive and accommodating as the sky itself.
The sky metaphor.
You allow the violent, dark thunderstorms of anger, the heavy, suffocating fogs of profound sorrow, and the radiant, piercing beams of joy to pass completely through the sky of your mind.
You just observe them.
You observe them clearly, you feel their physical effects in your body, you honor their presence, but you never, ever make the fundamental catastrophic error of mistaking yourself for the weather.
Wow.
You are not the transient storm. You are the permanent sky.
You are the sky. That changes the entire paradigm of how we view our own thoughts. As you, the listener, move forward from this shared space, as you step back into the chaotic rhythm of your ordinary morning, consider this final provocative thought. What if the absolute highest manifestation of your human strength is not found in the exhausting battles you continually wage against the universe?
What if it's much simpler?
Right. What if your ultimate power isn't found in your ability to conquer, to force change, to white-knuckle your way through adversity, or to perfectly control every variable in your environment? What if your greatest, most unshakable power is found simply in your quiet, unwavering willingness to witness a single passing breath exactly as it is, without needing it to be anything else? Think about that the next time you find yourself standing on that crowded transit car, looking out the window, walking down that familiar corridor.
You don't have to be a ghost.
No, you don't have to be a ghost haunting your own life. The webbing can dissolve. The pendulum can stop. You can just be the sky.